Commander Thex adjusted his mandibles nervously as he reviewed the holographic roster floating before him. The Galactic Combat Academy's pristine training facility hummed with activity, dozens of alien cadets from across the spiral arm chattering in various clicks, warbles, and harmonic frequencies. Today marked the beginning of the most ridiculous assignment of his military career. Attention, cadets. Thex's voice boomed through the translucent chamber, his forearms spreading wide for emphasis. We have been blessed with a new exchange student from the recently contacted world of Terra. A collective series of snorts, whistles, and what passed for laughter among the Zephyrian cadets filled the air. Crix, a particularly obnoxious specimen with iridescent scales, raised one of his 6 appendages. Commander, sir, isn't Terra one of those backwater death worlds? The ones with the primitive bipeds who still use projectile weapons? Correct, Cadet Crix. Thex's tone carried the weight of a being who had clearly lost some cosmic lottery. And before you ask, yes, we are required by the Galactic Accord to provide accommodations for their limited physiology. The massive blast doors at the Academy's entrance hissed open with theatrical timing. Through the swirling mist of decontamination protocols stepped what had to be the most underwhelming specimen Thex had ever witnessed. The human female stood barely 5.5 feet tall, her pale skin looking almost translucent under the Academy's harsh illumination. Thin brown hair fell in waves around a face that seemed constructed from angles too soft for any self-respecting warrior species. That's it, whispered Blitz, a hulking Vorthan cadet whose biceps were larger than the human's entire torso. That's our terrifying Deathworlder? Maya, according to her file, looked around the chamber with curious green eyes, seemingly oblivious to the barely concealed amusement rippling through the assembled cadets. She wore a standard-issue training suit that appeared 3 sizes too large, making her look like a child playing dress-up in adult clothing. Welcome to Nexus Prime, Cadet Maya, Thex announced with all the enthusiasm of someone introducing a new strain of space fungus. I trust you'll find our modified training regimen suitable for your unique biological limitations. The human smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both innocent and utterly terrifying in ways Thex couldn't quite articulate. Something about those small, white teeth made his exoskeleton itch uncomfortably. Thank you, Commander, Maya replied, her voice carrying a strange quality that seemed to resonate in frequencies most species couldn't quite process. I'll try to keep up. Oh, how wrong they all were. The following morning, Thex stood before his assembled cadets in Training Base 7, surrounded by enough safety equipment to stock a small medical frigate. Foam padding covered every surface within a 20-foot radius. Emergency medical drones hovered at the ready, and a trauma team waited on standby just outside the reinforced viewport. Now then, Thex began, his voice carrying the forced cheerfulness of someone explaining quantum physics to a particularly slow mollusk. Today we'll be introducing our special cadet to the fundamentals of combat technique. Maya stood at the center of the ridiculous safety circle, looking like a delicate flower planted in the middle of a military bunker. The other cadets had positioned themselves at what they clearly considered a safe distance, roughly the length of a small shuttlecraft. Cadet Maya, Thex continued, producing a training manual that appeared to have been hastily translated from 17 different languages. We've prepared a modified curriculum specifically designed for your limited physical parameters. Crix's scales shimmered with barely contained mirth. Commander, shouldn't we start with breathing exercises? I hear Deathworlders have trouble with oxygen regulation under stress. A chorus of what passed for snickers among various alien species filled the training bay. Maya's expression remained pleasantly neutral, though something flickered behind those green eyes that made Thex's primary heart skip a beat. Excellent suggestion, Cadet Crix, Thex replied through gritted mandibles. However, we'll begin with basic striking techniques. Now, Maya, observe carefully. Thex approached the standard training dummy, a reinforced composite designed to withstand impacts that could dent starship hulls. With exaggerated slowness, he demonstrated what he considered an appropriately gentle technique for a fragile human. See how I barely make contact? Thex explained, his strike landing with all the force of a gentle breeze. This is the maximum power level we expect from your species. Remember, control and restraint are paramount. We wouldn't want any accidents. More snickering from the assembled cadets. Blitz actually had to lean against a wall support to keep from collapsing with what Thex assumed was Vorthan laughter. Your turn, Maya, Thex announced with the confidence of someone who had clearly never made a catastrophic miscalculation. Remember, gentle contact only. Think of it as touching a soap bubble. Maya nodded seriously, stepped forward, and with what appeared to be the lightest possible tap, struck the training dummy. The reinforced composite exploded. Not cracked, not dented, exploded into roughly 47 pieces that scattered across the training bay like metallic confetti, several embedding themselves in the supposedly impenetrable wall plating. The silence that followed could have been bottled and sold as a weapon to species that communicated through sound. Emergency klaxons began wailing as the training bay's safety systems registered what they clearly interpreted as a catastrophic structural failure. Maya looked down at her fist with mild surprise. "Oops," she said quietly. "Was I supposed to pull that punch more?" Thex's exoskeleton had gone completely white. Somewhere in the distance he could hear Crix making what sounded like very quiet prayers to several different deities. 3 days later, after the Academy's engineering core had finished replacing Training Bay 7's entire structural framework, Thex found himself standing in the rebuilt facility with a sense of impending doom that his species typically reserved for approaching black holes. Today, he announced to the assembled cadets, his voice carrying the enthusiasm of someone volunteering for experimental surgery, "We will conduct our first formal sparring session." The safety protocols now in place made the previous precautions look laughably inadequate. Force field generators hummed at maximum power, creating a containment sphere that could theoretically withstand a small antimatter explosion. Medical teams from 3 different species waited in the observation deck, their equipment calibrated for everything from simple unconsciousness to complete molecular dissolution. Maya stood in the center of the sparring ring, still looking like someone had dressed a flower for war. Her opponent, Blitz, flexed his massive Vorthan muscles with the confidence of someone who had clearly never experienced doubt in his considerable lifetime. "This should be entertaining," Blitz announced, his voice carrying across the training bay like rolling thunder. "I promise to be gentle with our little Deathworlder. Wouldn't want to break something that fragile." The other cadets had gathered around the ring's perimeter, and Thex noticed with growing alarm that several were exchanging what appeared to be currency. Crix was operating what looked suspiciously like a betting pool, his scales practically glowing with amusement. 10 credits says the human lasts less than 5 seconds, Crix announced loudly enough for Maya to hear. 5 seconds? Called out an Exarian cadet with crystalline features. "I give her 2, maximum?" Maya's expression remained perfectly calm, though Thex caught something that might have been the ghost of a smile flickering across her features. That expression made his secondary heart start beating in patterns that usually indicated imminent system failure. "Cadets, take your positions," Thex commanded, moving to the safety of the observation booth with unseemly haste. "Remember, Maya, this is about technique and control. Stay calm. Use minimal force. We're looking for a gentle demonstration of basic combat principles." Blitz dropped into a fighting stance that showcased muscles the size of small shuttlecraft. "Don't worry, little human. I'll make this quick and painless." "Thank you," Maya replied politely. "I'll try to do the same." The match began with Blitz launching himself forward in what Vorthans considered a measured, controlled attack. To most species, it looked like a guided missile with anger management issues. Maya moved. X's visual processing systems couldn't quite track what happened next. One moment, Blitz was charging forward with enough momentum to level a small building. The next moment, he was airborne, traveling in a trajectory that suggested someone had fired him from a cannon. The Vorthan cadet collided with the far wall of the containment sphere with a sound like a starship docking poorly. He slid down the force field barrier, leaving what Thex was fairly certain was a cadet-shaped impression in the energy matrix before crumpling to the floor in a heap of unconscious muscle and wounded pride. Maya straightened her training uniform and looked around the suddenly silent training bay. "Was that too much?" she asked with genuine concern. "I tried to be really gentle. I barely touched him." Thex checked his chronometer with trembling appendages. The entire encounter had lasted exactly 3.7 seconds. In the betting pool section, Crix was staring at his currency collection with the expression of someone who had just witnessed the fundamental laws of physics filing for bankruptcy. "Our medical team to Training Bay 7, Thex announced weakly into his communicator. "We have an unconscious cadet." And possibly, he thought but didn't add, a complete reevaluation of everything they thought they knew about Deathworlders. The next morning found Thex standing before his considerably more subdued class in Lecture Hall Gamma, a space normally reserved for discussing theoretical applications that wouldn't result in structural damage to expensive academy property. After yesterday's incident, the engineering department had sent him a strongly worded message suggesting he keep the human away from anything that couldn't be replaced with petty cash. Today Thex began, his voice carrying the false confidence of someone who had spent the previous night researching emergency evacuation procedures. "We will focus on theoretical combat applications. Specifically, proper force modulation for species with limited physical capabilities." Maya sat in the front row, her small hands folded neatly in her lap, green eyes fixed on Thex with an intensity that made his exoskeleton itch. Something about her expression suggested she was listening to every word with the kind of attention usually reserved for enemy interrogations. "As we've established," Thex continued, pulling up a holographic display of various species' physical specifications. "Different races require different approaches to combat engagement. For instance, a Nexarian's crystalline structure allows for precise energy application, while a Vorthan's dense muscle mass provides significant impact resistance." Crix raised an appendage. "And humans, Commander?" "Humans." "Is," Thex replied with the tone of someone explaining basic arithmetic to a particularly slow processing unit, "represent the lower end of physical capability among spacefaring species. Their bone density is approximately 60% that of most civilized races. Their muscle mass is distributed inefficiently, and their reaction times are significantly slower than galactic standard." Maya's expression hadn't changed, but something in the air around her seemed to shift. Thex caught himself taking an involuntary step backward without quite understanding why. "This is why," he continued, warming to his subject with the enthusiasm of someone who had clearly never made a catastrophic error in judgment, "it's crucial to understand appropriate force application when dealing with lesser species. We must always remember to adjust our expectations downward." He gestured toward the center of the classroom, where a demonstration table had been positioned. The table itself was a masterpiece of Academy engineering, reinforced titanium carbide construction capable of withstanding impacts that could crack planetary surfaces, designed specifically for combat technique demonstrations. "Observe," Thex announced, approaching the table with theatrical confidence. "This training surface can withstand approximately 40,000 pounds of direct impact force. For perspective, that's roughly equivalent to being struck by a small asteroid." He delivered what he considered an appropriately measured strike to the table's surface. The impact resonated with a satisfying metallic ring, leaving exactly 0 visible damage to the reinforced structure. "Now then," Thex continued, turning toward Maya with what he undoubtedly thought was an encouraging expression, "perhaps our human cadet would like to demonstrate appropriate force application for her species?" Maya stood slowly, and several of the alien cadets instinctively shifted away from her. After yesterday's sparring incident, even the most obtuse among them had begun developing what appeared to be healthy survival instincts. "Just a gentle tap," Thex emphasized, his confidence returning as he contemplated the impossibility of a small human damaging academy-grade equipment. "It's something appropriate for your biological limitations. Think of it as touching a soap bubble." Again. "Yen." Maya approached the table with the same careful precision she'd shown in previous demonstrations. Her expression remained perfectly neutral, though Thex noticed her jaw was set in a way that suggested she might be concentrating particularly hard on something. Remember, Thex called out helpfully, we're looking for the absolute minimum force possible. Just show the class what human-level gentle contact looks like. Maya nodded seriously, drew back her fist approximately 6 inches, and delivered what appeared to be the most restrained punch in the history of violent motion. The titanium carbide table didn't just break. It didn't simply crack or dent or show stress fractures. It disintegrated into component atoms, with a sound like reality tearing along the seams. The shock wave that followed knocked half the class out of their seats and triggered every emergency system in the building. Debris that had moments before been 40,000 pounds of military-grade engineering equipment scattered across the lecture hall like expensive metallic snow. Several pieces embedded themselves in the rear wall with enough force to suggest they might emerge somewhere in the next star system. Crix dove under his desk with a high-pitched keening sound that Thex had never heard a Zephyrian make before. Other cadets were scrambling for exits that suddenly seemed woefully inadequate for proper evacuation procedures. In the center of the destruction, Maya stood perfectly still, looking down at her fist with what appeared to be mild annoyance. "I'm really sorry," she said quietly, her voice somehow carrying clearly through the chaos and emergency alarms. "I thought I was being gentle. I've been trying so hard to hold back." Thex stared at the crater where his demonstration table used to exist, his brain attempting to process concepts that seemed to violate several fundamental laws of physics. "Hold back," she'd said. She'd been holding back. 20 minutes later, Thex found himself in Medical Bay 3, watching Dr. Quillex run what had to be the most comprehensive biological scan in Academy history. The Altarian physician's tentacles moved across his equipment with the frantic precision of someone who had clearly drawn the short straw in assignment duties. "This is highly irregular," Dr. Quillex muttered, his translator working overtime to convert his rapid-fire chittering into something resembling coherent speech. "A full biological evaluation simply because a cadet broke some furniture? Highly irregular indeed." Maya sat patiently on the examination table, swinging her legs with the casual demeanor of someone who hadn't recently committed acts of violence against inanimate objects. The medical scanner hummed around her, collecting data that was causing Dr. Quillex's facial tentacles to twitch in increasingly alarming patterns. "Now then," the doctor announced with forced cheerfulness, "let's see what we're working with. Standard bipedal humanoid configuration, carbon-based life form, approximate mass of..." He paused, his 3 eyes blinking in rapid succession. "That can't be right." Thex leaned forward from his position near the door, close enough to observe, far enough to run if necessary. "What's the problem, Doctor?" "According to these readings," Dr. Quillex replied, his voice rising several octaves, "this human's bone density is approximately 3 times what our files indicate for her species. Her muscle fiber composition is by the 7 moons of Altair. This is impossible." The scanner continued its work, and Dr. Quillex's expression grew increasingly panicked. "Commander, her cardiovascular system is operating at efficiency levels that would be considered exceptional for a Nexarian combat specialist. Her reflexes are testing at speeds that would make a professional Zephyrian warrior jealous. And her skeletal structure." He paused, recalibrating his equipment with trembling tentacles. "Her skeletal structure could withstand impacts that would liquefy most known species." Maya cleared her throat politely. "Doctor, should I mention that I'm wearing a gravity restraint suit?" The medical bay fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems and what sounded like Dr. Quillex choking on his own breathing apparatus. "Oh, what now?" Thex managed to croak. "A gravity restraint suit," Maya repeated helpfully, beginning to unfasten what they had all assumed was a standard training uniform. "It's required equipment for humans operating in reduced gravity environments. We've been training under 4 times Earth standard gravity since we were children." As the suit peeled away, revealing a second layer of what appeared to be sophisticated compression gear, Dr. Quillex's scanner began emitting sounds that definitely weren't part of its normal operational parameters. 4 times, Thex began, his brain attempting to process mathematics that seemed designed to cause mental anguish. "Earth gravity is approximately 1.3 times what you have here on the station," Maya explained conversationally. So the restraint suit has been simulating about 5.2 times local gravity to keep me comfortable. Without it, I'd probably float around like a balloon. Dr. Quillex was now making sounds that his translator had apparently given up trying to interpret. The medical scanner's display showed readings that looked more like weapon specifications than biological data. "You mean," Thex said slowly, the implications crashing over him like a collapsing star, "everything you've done so far, the training dummy, the sparring match, the table you've been operating under more than 5 times the gravity you were designed for." "Well, yes," Maya replied with a shrug that somehow conveyed massive destructive potential. "Plus, I've been trying really hard to be gentle. My instructors back home always said humans have to be extra careful around more delicate species. We're supposed to hold back about 90% of our actual strength to avoid accidents." The medical bay's emergency lighting began flashing as Dr. Quillex's equipment registered what it clearly interpreted as the presence of a weapon of mass destruction. Somewhere in the distance, automated security systems were probably filing reports that would give Academy administrators nightmares for decades. 90%, Thex repeated faintly. "Oh yes," Maya nodded cheerfully. "Humans are what you'd call a high-gravity Deathworlder species. We evolved on a planet where pretty much everything was trying to kill us all the time. Apparently that makes us a bit more robust than most civilized races." Thex sat down heavily, his exoskeleton creaking under what felt like the weight of the universe. Somewhere in his mind, a small voice was screaming that they had been treating a living weapon like a delicate flower, and she'd been trying to be gentle. 2 hours later, fate decided to provide the Academy with a practical demonstration of everything they'd just learned. The combat simulation chamber's main computer, apparently suffering from what the engineering department would later classify as a catastrophic logic failure, activated a level 9 combat scenario during what was supposed to be a routine training exercise. Level 9 scenarios were typically reserved for elite military units with at least a decade of combat experience. They involved real energy weapons, actual explosives, and environmental hazards designed to simulate the kind of warfare that ended civilizations. The alien cadets trapped inside were not elite military units. The emergency lockdown activated, the computer announced in its maddeningly calm voice. "Simulation parameters, hostile boarding action, multiple breach points, live ammunition authorized. Estimated survival probability for current participants, 7%. Through the observation deck's reinforced viewport, Thex watched his students scramble for cover as combat drones armed with plasma weapons began materializing throughout the chamber. Crix was pressed against a wall, his scales flickering through color patterns that probably meant imminent death. Blitz, still nursing bruises from his encounter with Maya, was attempting to hide behind a barrier that wouldn't stop a strong sneeze, much less military-grade weaponry. "Can't you override the system?" Thex demanded, his 4 arms working frantically across the control panel. "Negative," replied the Academy's central AI with the helpful tone of a system that had clearly achieved sentience just long enough to develop a sadistic sense of humor. "Safety protocols have been suspended for the duration of the exercise. Manual override requires command authorization." "I'm giving you command authorization." "Command authorization not recognized." "Please contact your system administrator." The system administrator was currently 3 star systems away on vacation. In the simulation chamber, a plasma bolt seared past Crix's head, leaving a molten crater in the wall where his skull had been moments before. The Zephyrian cadet made a sound like a deflating balloon experiencing existential crisis. "Maya," Thex called out, turning to the human who had been watching the proceedings with increasing concern. "I'm about to ask you to do something that goes against every safety protocol in Academy history." Maya looked up from where she'd been studying the tactical display with what appeared to be professional interest. "You want me to go in there and get them out?" "Yes, and Maya?" Thex paused, the words feeling like they might actually cause physical damage to his vocal cords. "Don't hold back." Maya's expression shifted, and for the first time since her arrival, Thex saw something that looked like genuine excitement flicker across her features. "Really? You mean I can actually try?" "Whatever it takes to save my cadets." Maya stood up, and somehow the simple action seemed to change the fundamental nature of the space around her. She moved toward the chamber entrance with a fluid grace that suggested violence as an art form rather than a necessity. Computer, she called out as she approached the sealed door. One human requesting entry to combat simulation. Entry denied. Participant survival probability insufficient for Academy liability standards. Maya placed her hand on the reinforced door. Computer, I'm not asking. The titanium barrier, designed to withstand direct hits from starship weapons, crumpled like paper. Maya stepped through the opening she'd created, and what followed could only be described as a masterpiece of controlled destruction. She moved through the simulation chamber like physics had filed a formal complaint against her existence. Combat drones that had been menacing the alien cadets simply ceased to exist when she touched them. Energy barriers designed to channel movement dissolved under her passage. Environmental hazards that should have been lethal became minor inconveniences. Within 90 seconds, the simulation chamber had been transformed from a death trap into a debris field. Every hostile element had been neutralized with surgical precision, while every cadet remained completely unharmed. Maya emerged from the chamber carrying Crix under one arm and supporting a shell-shocked Blitz with the other, looking like someone who had just finished a light workout. All cadets accounted for, she reported cheerfully. Oh, injuries. Though I think Crix might need a moment to remember how breathing works. 1 week later, Thex stood in the newly constructed Training Bay 12, the 7th facility they'd built specifically for human combat instruction. The previous 6 had been retired during what the Academy now euphemistically referred to as calibration exercises. Today marks a new chapter in interspecies combat education, Thex announced to his assembled class, his voice carrying the tone of someone who had survived something that probably shouldn't have been survivable. We are pleased to introduce our revised training protocols for Deathworlder species. Maya stood in the center of what appeared to be a reinforced bunker designed by engineers with severe anxiety disorders. Force fields hummed at maximum output, gravity dampeners worked overtime, and the observation deck had been moved to what the safety committee considered a probably adequate distance of half a kilometer. The Academy's new human combat curriculum, Thex continued, reading from notes that trembled slightly in his grip, that acknowledges that previous assumptions about Terran physiology were incomplete. Crix, who had developed what appeared to be a nervous tic involving his scales, raised a tentative appendage. Commander, will Cadet Maya be demonstrating unrestricted techniques today? That's the plan, Cadet Crix. Thex's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement or terror. Maya has graciously agreed to show us what human combat capabilities actually look like when properly unleashed. Maya stretched casually, and several cadets instinctively moved behind reinforced barriers. It'll be nice to finally stretch properly, she said with the kind of smile that suggested entire star systems might want to consider relocation. I've been feeling a bit cramped lately. The demonstration that followed would become legendary throughout the Academy. Maya moved through combat scenarios designed for entire squads, treating obstacles that could stop armored vehicles like minor inconveniences. Her tactical thinking operated on levels that made military strategists weep, with either admiration or terror. When the session concluded, Thex found himself staring at a human who had just redefined everything the galaxy thought it knew about combat effectiveness. The other cadets regarded Maya with the kind of reverence usually reserved for natural disasters or cosmic phenomena. Any questions? Maya asked, looking remarkably composed for someone who had just violated several laws of physics. Blitz raised a massive hand with the careful precision of someone who had learned important lessons about survival. Cadet Maya, are all humans like you? Maya's grin could have powered a small space station. Oh no, she replied cheerfully. I'm actually considered pretty average back home. You should meet our military specialists sometime. In the observation deck, Thex made a mental note to update the Academy's diplomatic protocols immediately, possibly permanently.